You were born into a lie so ancient, so perfectly woven into the fabric of reality, that questioning it feels like questioning gravity itself. Every clock on every wall, every calendar marking your days, every institution promising salvation, all of it designed to keep you locked in a rhythm that isn't yours. The Mayans knew something we've forgotten. So did the Egyptians, the Vedic seers. They understood time as a sacred spiral, not the mechanical prison we've inherited. They tracked the great 26, zero-year cycle of the stars, watching ages rise and fall like cosmic seasons. Right now, we're living through the death throes of the Piscean age. 2,000 years of surrender, faith without question, following external authorities. But something's stirring. The astronomical reality of precession is pulling us toward Aquarius, toward awakening, toward remembering who we really are. If you feel restless, if the old stories aren't working anymore, you're not broken. You're remembering. The ancient rhythm is calling you home. 2,000 years ago, something extraordinary happened to human consciousness. It wasn't a single event you could point to on a calendar, but rather a cosmic shift that rewrote the entire operating system of civilization. The age of Pisces had begun, and with it came a fundamental transformation in how humanity would relate to truth, power, and the divine. To understand what happened to us, you need to grasp what we were transitioning from. The age of Aries, which had dominated for over 2 millennia, was pure fire energy. Think conquest, warfare, individual heroism, and direct action. Aries ruled through the sword, through personal will, through the courage to charge headfirst into battle. The great empires of this age, Babylon, Persia, early Rome, were built on the Aryan principles of might, expansion, and the divine right of the strongest warrior. But around the time of Christ's birth, the cosmic wheel turned, and Neptune's influence began to wash over human consciousness like an incoming tide. Pisces, the fish, ruled by the planet of dreams, illusions, and mystical dissolution, brought an entirely different energy to our species. Where Aries said, "Conquer," Pisces whispered, "Surrender." Where Aries demanded action, Pisces offered faith. Where Aries celebrated the individual warrior, Pisces spoke of universal love and collective salvation. This wasn't some accident of cosmic timing. Each astrological age brings humanity-specific lessons, challenges, and evolutionary pressures. The Piscean age came to teach us about compassion, spiritual yearning, and the interconnectedness of all life. At its highest expression, Pisces offers genuine mysticism, the ability to dissolve the ego and touch the infinite. The early Christian mystics, the Gnostics, the mystery school initiates, they embodied this beautiful Piscean energy in its purest form. But here's where the story takes a dark turn, because Pisces carries within it a dangerous shadow. The same energy that can produce saints and mystics can also create martyrs, victims, and people who surrender their personal power to external authorities. The Piscean consciousness naturally looks outside itself for salvation, for a savior, for someone else to carry the burden of spiritual responsibility. The symbol of Pisces, two fish swimming in opposite directions, tells us everything we need to know. One fish swims toward enlightenment, toward genuine spiritual awakening. The other swims toward illusion, toward the comfortable lies that keep us spiritually dependent and emotionally sedated. For the last 2,000 years, humanity has been caught between these two currents, and unfortunately, the fish swimming toward illusion has been winning. The early spiritual movements that emerged during this transition carried the authentic Piscean energy. They spoke of direct mystical experience, of the kingdom of heaven within, of each person's inherent divine nature. The Gnostics taught that salvation came through gnosis, direct knowing, not blind belief. They understood that the divine spark existed within every human being, not in some distant heaven requiring an intermediary, but empire recognized an opportunity. Around 325 CE, Emperor Constantine convened the Council of Nicaea, and everything changed. What had been a diverse collection of mystical teachings was systematically edited, standardized, and weaponized. Sacred texts that emphasized direct spiritual experience were branded heretical and destroyed. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, dozens of other texts that spoke of inner divinity and personal spiritual authority, gone. In their place rose an institution that perfectly exploited Piscean psychology. Instead of teaching people to look within for the divine, the new system taught them to look up, to external authorities, to a distant God who could only be reached through official intermediaries. The beautiful Piscean impulse towards surrender was redirected away from surrendering to divine truth and towards surrendering to human institutions. The Vesica Piscis, that sacred geometric symbol of two intersecting circles that creates the fish shape, had originally represented the intersection of spirit and matter, the portal through which divine consciousness enters the physical world. But watch how it evolved. It became the Christian fish symbol, then corporate logos, then branding for institutions that kept people spiritually dependent rather than awakened. This wasn't accidental. The architects of these systems understood Piscean psychology better than most people understand it today. They knew that Pisces naturally seeks something to believe in, something greater than itself to serve. They knew that Piscean energy would rather trust than verify, would rather have faith than demand proof, would rather follow than lead. So they gave Pisces exactly what it craved, but in a form that served power rather than truth. They created elaborate mythologies that satisfied the Piscean hunger for meaning, while ensuring that meaning always pointed away from personal empowerment. They established hierarchies that fed the Piscean desire for spiritual connection, while making sure that connection always required an intermediary who could be controlled, corrupted, or co-opted. The genius of this system was how it used genuine Piscean virtues as the delivery mechanism for spiritual poison. Compassion became enabling. Forgiveness became acceptance of injustice. Faith became willful ignorance. The beautiful Piscean capacity for self-sacrifice was twisted into martyrdom complexes that served the interests of those in power. For 2,000 years, this has been our reality, and the psychological programming runs so deep that most people can't even imagine spiritual life without external authority. The techniques used to maintain this dependency are sophisticated beyond what I can share on public platforms. But if you're ready to understand how these ancient manipulation methods still control modern consciousness, I encourage you to join our private Insights Academy newsletter. Subscribers receive exclusive content about these hidden influence systems, plus a free copy of the Kybalion. But this offer is only available for a limited time. But here's what the controllers never anticipated. Even within their corrupted system, the authentic flame of mystical truth never died. Throughout the Piscean age, genuine mystics, alchemists, and wisdom keepers maintained the original teachings. They worked in secret, encoded their knowledge in symbols and stories, and waited for the cosmic wheel to turn again. They knew that Pisces was never meant to be the final destination. It was preparation. 2,000 years of learning about faith, surrender, and spiritual yearning, but also 2,000 years of learning the difference between authentic spiritual experience and institutional manipulation. The Piscean age taught us to recognize both the ecstasy of genuine mystical connection and the bitter taste of spiritual dependency. Now, as we stand at the threshold of Aquarius, we carry both lessons forward. We know what it feels like to surrender to something greater than ourselves, and we also know what it costs when that surrender is misdirected. We've learned to hunger for spiritual truth, and we've learned to recognize when that hunger is being exploited. The mystics who kept the flame alive through the long Piscean night weren't just preserving ancient wisdom. They were preparing for this moment, when humanity would finally be ready to reclaim its spiritual authority and step into the age of direct knowing, individual awakening, and collective transformation. The battle between sleep and awakening is intensifying because we're caught between two cosmic ages. The old Piscean programming fights to maintain its hold, while the new Aquarian energy calls us towards something unprecedented in human history. A spiritually awakened civilization that needs no external saviors, because it has remembered the divine spark within every human heart. Look around you right now. See that fish symbol on the back of someone's car? That cross hanging around someone's neck? These aren't just innocent religious symbols. They're the remnants of one of the most sophisticated psychological operations in human history, the systematic hijacking and inversion of humanity's most sacred spiritual symbols. Let me show you how deep this rabbit hole goes. That simple fish symbol? Originally, it wasn't a fish at all. It was the Vesica Piscis, two intersecting circles, representing the portal between dimensions, the sacred geometry of creation itself. Ancient mystics understood this as the doorway between the physical and spiritual realms. But watch what happened during the Piscean Age. This profound symbol of cosmic consciousness got flattened, simplified, mass-produced, and slapped on the backs of minivans as a religious brand. The portal between worlds became a bumper sticker. This wasn't accidental. This was the blueprint. Here's what they figured out about the Piscean consciousness. Pisces feels before it thinks. It trusts before it questions. It believes in the unseen. These are beautiful spiritual qualities, until someone with an agenda gets hold of them. The architects of religious control systems studied human psychology like master manipulators, and they discovered something crucial. Faith, in its purest form, is sacred trust in mystery. But when you inject fear into faith, it becomes the most powerful tool of control ever devised. Think about how this worked. They took the natural Piscean tendency towards surrender and twisted it into submission. They took the beautiful impulse to seek guidance and perverted it into dependency on intermediaries. They built entire architectures of control, hierarchies where God could only be reached through approved channels, confession systems, where your private thoughts became their intelligence, tithing structures that kept you financially dependent, and the most insidious doctrine of all, that questioning equals rebellion against the divine. But here's where it gets really dark. They didn't just create external control systems. They hijacked your emotional operating system. Pisces is ruled by Neptune, the planet of dreams, intuition, and emotional depth. The controllers learned to weaponize these very qualities. Instead of appealing to logic or reason, they discovered they could program entire populations through feelings. Guilt became more powerful than chains. Shame became more effective than soldiers. They created belief systems built on unworthiness, where you were born broken and could only be fixed through their prescribed methods. Watch how they inverted everything sacred. The serpent, ancient symbol of wisdom, Kundalini energy, and transformation, suddenly became evil incarnate. The tree of knowledge, representing the human birthright to understand reality, became forbidden. Your own intuition, your direct connection to source, became dangerous and unreliable. Meanwhile, symbols of submission were elevated as sacred. The cross, an instrument of execution, became the ultimate symbol of salvation. The shepherd and flock metaphor made dependency sound spiritual. The witch trials weren't random hysteria. They were systematic campaigns to eliminate anyone who maintained direct spiritual connection without institutional intermediaries. Mostly women, because feminine wisdom posed the greatest threat to patriarchal religious control. They burned libraries, destroyed mystery schools, and demonized natural healing. Anything that suggested humans could access divine knowledge directly. This pattern wasn't limited to Christianity. Look across cultures during the Piscean Age and you'll see the same blueprint everywhere. Institutionalize the sacred, create intermediaries, establish hierarchies, and make people afraid of their own spiritual power. Buddhism got turned into rigid monasteries. Hinduism developed caste systems. Indigenous shamanic traditions were branded as devil worship. The pattern was universal because it worked. But here's the most brilliant part of their strategy. They didn't need chains or prisons. They made people love their limitations. They convinced populations that questioning was dangerous, that suffering was noble, that poverty was spiritual, that the body was sinful, while institutions were sacred. They programmed people to defend the very systems that enslaved them. And this programming runs so deep that even today, when you point out these inversions, people get triggered. They'll defend religious institutions that have been exposed for systemic abuse. They'll argue for tithing to organizations with billion-dollar real estate portfolios. They'll claim that questioning spiritual authority is somehow unspiritual. The conditioning is that thorough. The great inversion was complete. Light was called darkness. Wisdom was labeled dangerous. Natural healing became witchcraft, and direct spiritual experience was deemed heretical. They convinced humanity that the very faculties that could set them free, intuition, questioning, personal spiritual exploration, were sins against God. But something's happening right now that they didn't anticipate. The Aquarian age is exposing these inversions. People are waking up to realize that spirituality and religion are often opposites, that the most religious institutions often exhibit the least spiritual behavior, that the symbols of wisdom they were taught to fear actually represent human liberation. The Vesica Piscis is being remembered for what it really is. The serpent is being recognized as the symbol of awakening consciousness. The tree of knowledge is being understood as humanity's invitation to wisdom, not a cosmic mistake. The sacred feminine is rising from centuries of suppression. Natural healing is being reclaimed from the witchcraft label. This is why understanding these inversions matters so much right now. You're living through the great revealing, the moment when the sacred symbols are returning to their original meanings, when spiritual authority is being returned to the individual, when the intermediaries are being exposed as unnecessary middlemen in your relationship with the divine. The controllers knew that Pisces would eventually give way to Aquarius. They knew their time was limited, but they also knew that if they could program the inversions deep enough, people would carry the limitations voluntarily, even after the external controls crumbled. The question is, are you ready to see these sacred symbols for what they really are? Are you prepared to reclaim your spiritual authority from the institutions that hijacked it? Because the age of intermediaries is ending, and the age of direct knowing is beginning. What if I told you that everything you've experienced, every moment of confusion, every dark night of the soul, every time you felt lost or forgotten, was not a cosmic accident, but a sacred agreement you made before you ever took your first breath? I know that sounds impossible. When you're in the depths of spiritual amnesia, when you can't remember who you really are or why you're here, it feels like punishment. It feels like you've been abandoned by the universe, left to stumble through this dense reality without a map or compass. But what if that feeling of abandonment is actually the most profound act of love you've ever experienced? Here's what the ancient mystery schools understood that we've forgotten. Certain truths are so luminous, so overwhelming in their magnitude, that carrying them constantly would incinerate human consciousness. Imagine trying to live a normal life while simultaneously being aware of your infinite nature, your connection to every star in the cosmos, your ability to reshape reality with a thought. You wouldn't be able to function in this dense, physical world. You'd be like someone trying to perform surgery while staring directly into the sun. So souls, and I mean this literally, make an agreement before incarnation. They choose to veil themselves, to forget their divine nature temporarily, not as punishment, but as the ultimate act of courage. Think about it. What kind of being willingly enters a reality where they'll forget their own power, their own divinity, their own cosmic heritage? Only the bravest souls volunteer for that level of spiritual amnesia. This is why the Piscean age, with all its confusion and control systems we discussed earlier, wasn't a cosmic mistake. It was a training ground. Pisces, ruled by Neptune, is the master of illusion, but also the master of transcendence. For 2,000 years, souls have been incarnating specifically to experience the full spectrum of human emotion, to feel what it's like to believe in separation, to experience powerlessness so profound that when they finally remember their true nature, the awakening will be earth-shattering. Consider this paradox. Without experiencing separation, how can you truly appreciate union? Without feeling powerless, how can you recognize your infinite power? Without believing salvation comes from outside yourself, how would you ever discover the divine spark that's been burning inside you all along? Every time you felt like something was missing, every time you've gazed at the stars and felt homesick for a place you couldn't name, every time you've heard a piece of music that made you weep for reasons you couldn't explain, that was your soul remembering the agreement. That was the veil becoming temporarily transparent, allowing you to glimpse what you chose to forget. The souls incarnating during this transition period between Pisces and Aquarius didn't just sign up for one age or the other. They specifically chose to experience both, the forgetting of Pisces and the remembering of Aquarius. This is why so many people today feel like they're living between worlds, like they don't quite belong to this reality, but haven't fully stepped into the next one either. You know that feeling when you wake up from a vivid dream and you can almost remember it, but the harder you try to grasp it, the more it slips away. That's what it's like, being a transitional soul. You're mourning something you can't name because part of you remembers the cosmic consciousness you agreed to forget. You're homesick for a dimension of reality that you chose to veil from yourself. But here's where it gets really profound. This agreement ripples both backward through your lifetimes and forward through your choices. Every moment of awakening you experience doesn't just benefit you, it benefits the entire collective consciousness. When one person remembers who they really are, it makes it easier for everyone else to remember too. It's like the 100th monkey effect, but for spiritual awakening. This is why your personal journey matters so much more than you realize. When you break through a limiting belief, when you recognize a pattern and choose differently, when you stop looking for salvation outside yourself and start cultivating the divine within, you're not just healing yourself, you're fulfilling the cosmic agreement you made before incarnation. You're doing exactly what you came here to do. The pain you've experienced, the confusion, the long dark nights when you couldn't feel any connection to the divine, all of that was part of the curriculum, not because the universe is cruel, but because contrast creates clarity. You had to experience the illusion of separation so completely that when you finally remember your connection to everything, it won't just be an intellectual understanding. It will be a cellular knowing that can never be taken from you. This perspective transforms everything. Pain becomes purposeful. Confusion becomes part of the curriculum. Awakening becomes not an achievement you have to earn, but a remembering of what you've always been. You stop being a victim of circumstances and start recognizing yourself as the author of your own spiritual journey. The sacred symbols that were inverted during the Piscean age, the control systems that made you forget your power, even the suffering that felt so meaningless, all of it was serving the greater purpose of your soul's evolution. You chose to experience the fullness of human existence, including its shadows, so that when you step into the Aquarian age of remembering, you'll do so with the wisdom that can only come from having truly forgotten. The veil was never meant to be permanent. It was always designed to dissolve when the cosmic breath shifted, when the age changed, when enough souls had completed their journey through forgetting and were ready to remember. And that time is now. The agreement you made in the cosmic realm before incarnation included a built-in awakening mechanism, and it's activating all around you. You're not broken. You're not lost. You're not behind schedule. You're exactly where your soul planned to be, completing the most courageous spiritual journey imaginable, the journey from divine amnesia back to cosmic remembrance. We live in a world obsessed with linear time, progress, evolution, moving forward, always forward. But what if I told you that our ancestors understood something we've forgotten? They knew time isn't a straight line racing towards some imagined future. Time is a wheel, and right now, that wheel is turning in ways that explain everything you're feeling. The ancient world operated on cyclical time. They watched the stars, tracked the seasons, and understood that consciousness itself moves in great cosmic rhythms. They weren't primitive stargazers making up stories. They were sophisticated astronomers who discovered something profound. Every 26, 0 years, our planet completes what they called the Great Year, or Platonic Year. Here's how it works. Earth doesn't just spin on its axis and orbit the sun. It also wobbles, like a spinning top slowing down. This wobble is so slow that it takes 26, 0 years to complete one full cycle. As Earth wobbles, the spring equinox appears to rise through different constellations of the zodiac. Each constellation gets about 160 years. This is what creates the astrological ages. But here's what most people miss. This wasn't abstract philosophy to ancient civilizations. This was lived reality. They understood that each age brings specific frequencies, specific lessons, specific evolutionary challenges for humanity. The Egyptians built their temples to track this cycle. The Mayans created calendars around it. The Sumerians encoded it in their mythology. They all knew the same secret. Consciousness evolves in predictable patterns, tied to cosmic time. Look at the last 3 ages, and tell me you don't see the pattern. The age of Aries, roughly 20 BCE to the time of Christ, was the age of fire, war, empire building, and conquest. Think of the rise of warrior cultures, the Roman legions, the Bronze and Iron Ages. Aries, energy, aggressive, pioneering, dominating through force. Then came Pisces, the fish, the age of faith, surrender, emotional depth, and yes, illusion. Christianity emerges right on schedule with its fish symbol, its emphasis on belief over knowing, its promise of salvation through surrender. But Pisces is also the age of deception, of veils, of losing yourself in others' dreams. The sacred symbols we discussed before, they were inverted during this Piscean age because Pisces energy can transform truth into illusion as easily as it can transform illusion into truth. Now we're transitioning into Aquarius, the water bearer, the age of electricity, revelation, individual sovereignty, and awakening. Suddenly, everything makes sense, doesn't it? The internet connecting all minds, electricity powering our world, information flowing like water, people waking up to their own power instead of surrendering it to authorities. But here's the crucial part. These transitions aren't clean. They don't happen overnight. They overlap like dawn bleeding into twilight, creating what I call threshold periods. We're living in one right now. The old Piscean patterns are tightening their grip while new Aquarian energies flood in. This creates the chaos, the polarization, the simultaneous awakening and resistance you see everywhere. Think about it. The old systems are doubling down on control, on keeping you asleep, on maintaining the illusions that worked for 20 years. But at the same time, more people are waking up than ever before. The cosmic agreement you made to forget, that contract is expiring. The wheel is turning whether the controllers want it to or not. Ancient astrologers weren't just tracking stars for entertainment. They were cosmic scientists encoding this knowledge in stone temples, zodiac wheels, and mythological stories. They left us a roadmap. The Sphinx, with its lion body representing Leo, the age opposite Aquarius, faces east toward the constellation Leo, marking the last time we were in this transition 26, 0 years ago. They knew we'd need guidance when the wheel turned again. This understanding transforms everything. Current events stop looking like random chaos and start revealing themselves as predictable patterns of transition. The breakdown of old institutions, the rise of individual empowerment, the explosion of alternative information sources, the collapse of traditional authorities. This isn't accidental. It's astronomical. Different civilizations left us warnings and guidance for exactly this moment. The Hopi spoke of the Great Purification. The Mayans pointed to this time period in their long count calendar. The Vedic traditions describe the transition between yugas. They all saw the same cosmic pattern from different angles. But here's what's beautiful about the wheel. It doesn't mean repetition. It means spiral evolution. We're encountering the same themes at higher octaves. The last time we transitioned from Pisces to Aquarius, humanity wasn't ready. We didn't have the technology, the global communication, the collective consciousness. This time, we do. This is why sensitive people can feel the shift in their bodies and consciousness before it becomes visible in external events. You're picking up the frequency change. The cosmic weather is shifting, and you're feeling it the way some people feel storms coming in their bones. The ancient Egyptians had a saying, "As above, so below." The macrocosm reflects in the microcosm. As the great wheel turns above, consciousness shifts below. We're not victims of random historical forces. We're participants in a cosmic rhythm that our ancestors understood and tracked with precision. Understanding these cycles provides the ultimate perspective shift. Instead of fear about changing times, you can feel anticipation. Instead of confusion about world events, you can see the pattern. Instead of feeling lost in transition, you can recognize exactly where humanity stands in its great evolutionary journey. The wheel is turning. Aquarius is rising. And you're here, awake, aware, right on schedule for the greatest transformation in human history. That's not coincidence. That's cosmic timing. You know what's fascinating about the Piscean age? The very energy that was meant to liberate humanity became the most sophisticated control mechanism in history. And it happened so brilliantly, so systematically, that most people still don't see it. Picture this. Rome, 313 CE, Emperor Constantine is facing a crumbling empire. The old gods aren't working anymore. People are hungry for something deeper, something that speaks to their souls. And there's this growing movement called Christianity that's spreading like wildfire among the masses. Now, Constantine could have crushed it, like every emperor before him tried to do. Instead, he did something genius. He absorbed it. This wasn't some divine vision on a battlefield. This was pure political calculation. Constantine recognized that the mystical longing of the Piscean age, that deep human need for transcendence, for connection to something greater, was incredibly powerful. But more importantly, it was controllable. Think about the original Christian message. It was revolutionary. Love your enemies. The meek shall inherit the earth. Challenge the money changers. Question authority. This was mystical rebellion in its purest form. But within decades of Constantine's conversion, something extraordinary happened. That same rebellious energy was channeled into the most obedient population the world had ever seen. How did they do it? They understood Piscean energy better than the mystics themselves. They knew that people in this age would naturally seek surrender, would long to dissolve their individual will into something greater. So they gave them something to surrender to. But instead of surrendering to divine love or cosmic consciousness, they were surrendering to human institutions. The technique was brilliant. First, they made people feel fundamentally broken. Not just mistaken or misguided, but broken at the level of their very existence. Original sin wasn't theology, it was programming. You are born wrong. You are born guilty. You are born unworthy of love. Then they created exclusive access to salvation. Only through this institution, only through these specific rituals, only through these appointed intermediaries, could you possibly hope to heal that fundamental brokenness. They literally placed human priests between individuals and their own divine nature. But here's the masterstroke. They weaponized the Piscean gift of empathy and turned it into fear. Eternal punishment wasn't just about you suffering. It was about everyone you love suffering. Your children, your parents, your community. If you question, if you rebel, if you look inward instead of outward to the institution, you're not just damning yourself, you're damaging everyone around you. The symbols tell the whole story. The fish, the ancient symbol of consciousness swimming in the waters of the unconscious, became the mark of institutional membership. Water, the element of flow and intuition, became something you could only access through official baptism. The shepherd and flock imagery, originally about the awakened part of yourself guiding the unconscious parts, became about external authority managing helpless masses. This pattern repeated everywhere mystical energy arose. When the Gnostics emerged with their message of direct divine experience, they were labeled heretics and systematically eliminated. When the Library of Alexandria housed the accumulated wisdom of multiple mystical traditions, it was destroyed. The Crusades were fought in the name of love. The Inquisition eliminated alternative spiritual practices with surgical precision. Every time someone said, "You can connect directly with the divine," the institutional response was swift and brutal. Because direct connection is uncontrollable, individual awakening is unmanageable. But collective worship, collective guilt, collective dependence on external salvation, that's the foundation of empire. What's remarkable is how willingly people submitted. This wasn't conquest through armies, though those were used when necessary. This was conquest through meaning. People genuinely believed they were serving God, while actually serving the political and economic interests of human institutions. The sophistication was staggering. They created a civilization where questioning became rebellion, obedience became virtue, and looking inward became dangerous. The very faculties that could lead to awakening, curiosity, intuition, direct experience, were reframed as temptations from evil forces. And if you think this is ancient history, look around. How many political movements today use spiritual language to sell economic agendas? How many leaders claim divine mandate for very human power grabs? How many institutions promise transcendence while delivering dependence? The same techniques are everywhere. Make people feel broken by circumstances beyond their control. Create exclusive access to solutions. Establish hierarchies that place institutions between individuals and their own power. Weaponize fear of catastrophic consequences for non-compliance. Climate change, economic security, social justice, national security. Watch how these legitimate concerns get packaged with the same underlying message. You are powerless. The situation is hopeless. Only complete surrender to our prescribed solutions can save you. This is why understanding this history matters so much right now. We're transitioning out of the Piscean age, moving into Aquarian energy. But the institutional structures built during the Piscean age are still here, still operating, still using the same techniques. The difference is that Aquarian energy doesn't respond to these old control mechanisms the same way. Aquarius is about individual sovereignty within collective consciousness. It's about horizontal networks rather than vertical hierarchies. It's about direct knowing rather than mediated truth. But here's the thing. If you don't recognize how the old system works, you'll just create new versions of the same trap. You'll build new institutions that promise awakening but deliver dependence. You'll create new hierarchies that claim to serve consciousness but actually serve power. The real spiritual work of this transition isn't just awakening to your own divine nature, though that's essential. It's learning to recognize when that awakening is being co-opted, packaged, and sold back to you as a product or ideology. The question isn't whether you're spiritual or not. The question is whether your spirituality serves your awakening or someone else's agenda. And the only way to know the difference is to understand exactly how empire hijacked mysticism in the first place. Because they're still using the same playbook. They're just updating the language for a new age. What happened during the Piscean Age wasn't just religious conquest or political manipulation. It was something far more sophisticated and devastating. A complete inversion of spiritual truth that turned reality upside down and convinced humanity that their greatest gifts were their greatest sins. This wasn't accidental. When the Roman Empire absorbed Christianity and transformed it from a mystical teaching into an institutional religion, they didn't just change the message, they systematically reversed it. Everything that connected you directly to your own divinity suddenly became dangerous. Everything that required an intermediary became holy. Think about how thorough this inversion was. The serpent, which represented wisdom and renewal in countless ancient traditions, the Kundalini energy, the Ouroboros of eternal cycles, the sacred medicine carriers of indigenous cultures, suddenly became the ultimate symbol of evil. The tree of knowledge, representing the awakening of consciousness itself, became forbidden. Eating from it wasn't enlightenment. It was the original sin that damned all humanity. The feminine principle, which had been revered for millennia as the creative force of the universe, was systematically demonized. The goddess temples that had served as centers of healing, wisdom, and spiritual initiation were destroyed or converted. The priestesses who had guided communities through the mysteries of birth, death, and transformation were hunted down as witches. Midwives who knew the ancient arts of herbal medicine were burned at stakes, while male physicians who knew nothing about the female body were elevated as authorities. But here's where it gets truly insidious. Your intuition, that inner knowing that had guided humans for thousands of years, was labeled as foolish, unreliable, even demonic. Meanwhile, blind obedience to external authority was called wisdom and virtue. Your body, the very vessel through which you experience the sacred, was declared sinful and shameful. Yet institutions built of stone and hierarchy were deemed divine. The earth itself, Gaia, the living planet that birthed and sustained all life, was labeled as fallen, corrupted, something to transcend rather than honor. But the hierarchies that extracted wealth from the earth and concentrated it in the hands of the few, those were called God's will. This inversion operated on levels most people never recognized. It rewired the collective nervous system of humanity. Whenever truth tried to emerge from within, fear would activate. Whenever someone began to trust their own direct experience of the sacred, ancestral programming would kick in with warnings. This is dangerous. This got people killed. Stay quiet. Stay small. Let the authorities handle spiritual matters. You can feel this programming even today. Notice what happens when you consider trusting your inner guidance over expert opinion. Notice the subtle hesitation when you think about exploring spiritual practices outside established religions. That's not your fear. That's generational trauma encoded in your DNA from centuries of persecution. The systematic elimination of earth-based spiritual practices wasn't random violence. It was targeted destruction of anything that fostered direct connection to the sacred without institutional mediation. The druids who could read the wisdom in trees and stars. The shamans who could journey between worlds for healing. The wise women who knew which plants could ease pain or prevent pregnancy. All of them had to go because they represented spiritual sovereignty, the terrifying idea that you could access the divine directly. Even the language itself was weaponized. Words like witch originally meant wise one. Pagan simply meant country dweller, people who still lived close to the land and its rhythms. Heretic meant one who chooses, someone who made their own spiritual decisions rather than accepting dogma. These words were loaded with terror and death until entire populations learned to police their own spiritual impulses. The healing arts that had sustained communities for millennia were driven underground. Plant medicine that could heal both body and spirit became devil's work. Sacred geometry that revealed the mathematical harmony of creation was hidden in secret societies. Astrology, which had guided civilizations for thousands of years, was relegated to superstition. while a mechanical worldview that saw the cosmos as dead matter was elevated as scientific truth. But perhaps the cruelest inversion of all was making suffering into virtue. The natural human desire for joy, pleasure, abundance, and spiritual fulfillment was reframed as selfish and sinful. Meanwhile, poverty, self-denial, and submission to authority became the path to salvation. This kept entire populations docile and grateful for scraps, while their life force was harvested by those who lived in luxury behind the very walls that preached poverty as righteousness. The psychological mechanism was brilliant in its cruelty. By convincing people that their own inner knowing was corrupted, the inversion created a dependency that lasted generations. People learned to distrust their instincts, doubt their perceptions, and defer to external authorities for everything from spiritual guidance to medical care to understanding their own emotions. This is why so many people today feel spiritually homeless, even within religious traditions. Deep down, they know something has been inverted, but they can't quite put their finger on what. They sense that what they've been told is salvation might actually be another veil over truth, but they've been programmed to fear that very insight. Now, as Aquarian energy floods the planet, this ancient inversion is finally cracking. People are remembering that the witch was the healer, the heretic was the free thinker, and the pagan was simply someone who never forgot that the earth itself is sacred. What was called darkness is being revealed as light. What was labeled sin is being recognized as sovereignty. The serpent is reclaiming its place as the symbol of wisdom. The feminine is rising from centuries of suppression. The body is being honored as sacred temple rather than sinful prison. And most importantly, people are beginning to trust their inner knowing again, despite millennia of programming that warned them it was dangerous. What they called evil was often just independence. What they called salvation was frequently just another form of control. The great inversion is ending, and truth is finally safe to emerge from the shadows, where it has been hiding for 2,000 years. But even as the institutional machinery ground forward, crushing direct spiritual experience under the weight of doctrine and control, something extraordinary was happening in the shadows. The soul itself was staging a quiet rebellion. This wasn't the kind of revolution that makes headlines or topples governments. This was something far more dangerous to the powers that be. It was the revolution of remembrance. In caves and gardens, in monastery cells and forest clearings, in the homes of wise women and the workshops of mystic craftsmen, human beings were refusing to forget who they really were. Think about what this means. Here you have massive institutions spending centuries perfecting systems of spiritual control, and yet the flame of direct divine connection never went out. It couldn't go out, because it's not something external that can be extinguished. It's the very essence of what we are. The mystics understood this. Across every culture, in every corner of the world where institutional religion tried to place itself between humans and the divine, there arose these remarkable individuals who shared an almost identical approach to truth. They didn't want your worship, they wanted your awakening. They didn't offer you salvation through an intermediary. They showed you the direct path home. Look at the Sufis, spinning under starlight in the deserts of Persia and the courtyards of Cordoba. While Orthodox Islam was busy with rules and regulations, these ecstatic dancers were dissolving the boundaries between self and cosmos through movement and breath. They understood that the body itself was a gateway to the infinite, that consciousness could be shifted through rhythm and surrender. Rumi wasn't writing poetry to impress literary critics. He was encoding mystical experiences that could crack open hearts 1,000 years later. In the hidden communities of Gnostics, scattered and persecuted but never fully destroyed, ancient wisdom was being preserved in texts that wouldn't see daylight for centuries. They knew that the kingdom of heaven wasn't some distant reward for good behavior. It was a state of consciousness, available right here, right now. While the church was building cathedrals to house a distant god, The Gnostics were mapping the divine sparks within human consciousness itself. The Jewish Kabbalists were doing something similar, creating entire systems for understanding the invisible architecture of reality. In the back rooms of synagogues and the private studies of scholars, they were developing practices that could shift awareness from the mundane to the mystical. The Tree of Life wasn't just a pretty diagram. It was a roadmap for consciousness, a technology for awakening that bypassed every institutional gatekeeper. And then you have the Christian mystics, perhaps the most dangerous of all to institutional power, because they were working from within the system itself. Meister Eckhart wasn't just a theologian. He was a revolutionary, teaching people that they could experience God directly, without priest or sacrament. When he said God's ground and the soul's ground are one ground, he was essentially saying that the church's entire business model was unnecessary. Teresa of Avila was mapping states of consciousness that modern neuroscientists are just beginning to understand. Her descriptions of mystical union weren't metaphorical. They were precise accounts of what happens when ordinary awareness dissolves into something infinitely larger. The church tried to control her by making her a saint, but her actual teachings were far too radical for institutional comfort. These truth keepers had to be incredibly clever about how they operated. They developed elaborate systems of symbolism and metaphor that could hide revolutionary truths in plain sight. Alchemists weren't really trying to turn lead into gold. They were encoding the process of spiritual transformation in chemical terminology. The troubadours weren't just singing love songs. They were transmitting mystical teachings about the union of soul and spirit. Women carried this flame in particularly powerful ways, often because they were already operating outside official religious structures. The wise women, the herbalists, the midwives, they maintained connections to natural cycles and healing wisdom that institutional religion had largely abandoned. They understood that divinity wasn't confined to temples and texts. It was flowing through every plant, every season, every birth and death. These women passed down their knowledge through families and informal networks, creating an underground current of earth-based spirituality that survived every attempt at suppression. The witch trials weren't really about magic. They were about eliminating women who maintained direct spiritual authority outside patriarchal control. What's fascinating is how these mystics across different traditions kept arriving at the same essential insights. They understood that awakening couldn't be forced through doctrine or ritual. It could only be remembered through direct experience. They knew that truth didn't need institutional permission to exist. They recognized that the divine wasn't somewhere else, waiting to be reached. It was the very ground of being itself. They also understood something that modern spiritual seekers are rediscovering, that presence itself is a form of teaching. You didn't need to write books or give lectures to transmit awakening. Simply being in a state of authentic connection to Source created a field that could catalyze remembrance in others. This is how the flame was passed, often wordlessly, from teacher to student across generations. These mystics were planting seeds through everything they did: their presence, their writings, their students, their healing work. They created an underground network of consciousness that survived centuries of suppression, persecution, and institutional control. They were playing a much longer game than their oppressors realized. And here's what's remarkable about this moment we're living through now. All those seeds are sprouting simultaneously. The mystical wisdom that was hidden in margins and shadows for centuries is suddenly becoming mainstream. People are rediscovering meditation, energy healing, plant medicine, sacred geometry, and direct spiritual experience in ways that bypass traditional religious institutions entirely. This isn't some New Age invention. It's the fruition of a rebellion that never stopped. Every person today who chooses direct experience over dogma, inner knowing over external authority, is part of a lineage that stretches back through countless unnamed mystics who refused to let the flame die. The beautiful thing about this quiet rebellion is that it was never motivated by hatred or revenge. It was pure love, love for truth, that was stronger than fear of consequences. These mystics weren't trying to destroy anything. They were simply keeping alive the remembrance of what we really are. And that remembrance is what's awakening now, not as something foreign or new, but as the most natural thing in the world, the soul finally coming home to itself. The mystics who kept the flame alive during the darkest chapters of the Piscean age knew this moment would come. They whispered about it in their hidden gatherings, encoded it in their symbols, and passed down prophecies about the time when the water-bearer would arrive to shatter the illusions that had held humanity captive for 2,000 years. That time is now, and you're living through the most profound shift in human consciousness that our species has ever experienced. Aquarius doesn't carry water. This is the first thing most people get wrong about the water-bearer. Aquarius is the vessel, the pitcher that holds and pours forth the waters of truth. Think about what this means. While Pisces swam in the ocean of collective unconsciousness, often drowning in illusion and fantasy, Aquarius stands above the water, conscious and deliberate, choosing what to pour and where to pour it. This is the shift from being swept away by currents of belief to becoming the conscious director of truth itself. Uranus rules this sign. And if you understand Uranus, you understand why everything feels like it's accelerating and breaking apart simultaneously. Uranus is the planet of lightning, sudden, electric, impossible to predict or control. When lightning strikes, it doesn't ask permission from the tree, doesn't negotiate with the ground, doesn't wait for the perfect conditions. It simply reveals what was always there in the darkness and transforms everything it touches in an instant. This is exactly what's happening to the control systems that defined the Piscean age. The institutions that demanded blind faith are being struck by bolt after bolt of revelatory lightning. You've watched it happen in real time. Mainstream media losing credibility as people discover independent sources. Political establishments crumbling as citizens realize the game was rigged. Religious hierarchies hemorrhaging members as individuals find direct spiritual connection. Educational systems being questioned as people recognize the programming they've endured. The internet represents the most perfect manifestation of Aquarian energy our world has ever seen. It's the technological mirror of what mystics called the Akashic field, that invisible web of information connecting all consciousness. For the first time in human history, knowledge isn't controlled by gatekeepers. A teenager in rural Montana can access the same information as professors at Harvard. Ancient wisdom traditions that were hidden for centuries are now available with a simple search. But here's where it gets complex, because Aquarian energy always comes with tests. The internet can become a false akasha, endless data without wisdom, infinite information without understanding. Social media algorithms can trap us in echo chambers more sophisticated than any church doctrine ever was. We can mistake the consumption of information for actual knowing, digital connection for genuine community. The same technology that liberates us can also absorb our consciousness if we're not careful about how we engage with it. Artificial intelligence represents the ultimate Aquarian test. It's forcing us to ask fundamental questions about what makes us human, what consciousness actually is, and whether we'll maintain our sovereignty or surrender it to machines that promise to think for us. The choice isn't whether AI will exist, it's whether we'll use it as a tool for human enhancement or allow it to replace human discernment altogether. This is why the shift from Pisces to Aquarius feels so disorienting for so many people. Pisces was the age of faith. You believed what you were told by authorities. You had faith in systems. You trusted institutions to guide you toward truth. Aquarius is the age of knowing, direct experience, personal verification, individual sovereignty. Instead of believing in God, you develop a direct relationship with the divine. Instead of trusting experts, you become your own authority. Instead of following leaders, you learn to lead yourself. The Piscean model said, conform to serve the whole, sacrifice your individuality for the collective good, be a good sheep in the flock. Aquarius reveals a completely different truth. You serve the whole by becoming fully yourself. Unity isn't achieved through uniformity, but through harmony. Like an orchestra where every instrument plays its unique part to create something magnificent together. The violin doesn't try to sound like the trumpet. It becomes the most perfect violin it can be. Your body is adapting to these higher frequencies, whether you're conscious of it or not. Many people are experiencing increased sensitivity to foods, to environments, to other people's emotions. Sleep patterns are shifting. Dreams are becoming more vivid and prophetic. Synchronicities are multiplying. Some are calling this DNA activation, the awakening of dormant genetic potentials that connect us more directly to cosmic consciousness. This isn't just metaphysical speculation. Your nervous system is literally rewiring itself to handle more electrical input. The carbon-based density that characterized human consciousness for millennia is giving way to what some researchers call crystalline consciousness, a more refined, more conductive state of being that can process information at quantum speeds. The transition is creating chaos because old structures are resisting, while new energies demand authentic alignment. You can't fake your way through an Aquarian awakening. The lightning of truth burns through pretense, reveals hidden motivations, exposes what isn't genuine. This is why so many relationships are ending, careers are shifting, and people are questioning everything they thought they knew about themselves. Light codes are being transmitted through dreams, through moments of sudden insight, through encounters with certain people or places that trigger profound remembering. Your consciousness is being upgraded, often while you sleep, preparing you for capabilities that seemed impossible just a few years ago. Telepathic communication, energetic healing, manifestation through focused intention. These aren't mystical fantasies, but emerging human capacities. You're not just witnessing this transformation, you're one of the bridges between worlds. Every time you choose authenticity over conformity, direct knowing over blind belief, personal sovereignty over institutional dependence, you're anchoring Aquarian frequencies into this reality. You're carrying the consciousness of the coming age in your very being, helping birth a world where truth flows freely and human potential is no longer artificially constrained. The dawn has broken. The lightning is striking, and you're discovering that you've always been both the storm and the clear sky that follows. Have you ever felt like you don't quite belong in this world? Like you're homesick for a place you've never been? Or mourning the loss of something you can't even name? If you're watching this video, chances are you've carried this strange ache your entire life. This feeling of being fundamentally different, of seeing through illusions that others seem to accept without question. Here's what I've discovered after years of research into consciousness and the astrological ages. You're not broken, and you're not alone. You're part of a specific group of souls who incarnated during this transition between Pisces and Aquarius for a very particular mission. You came here carrying codes from the future while living in systems from the past. And that's exactly why you've felt this internal tension your entire life. Think about it. While others seem to naturally accept authority without question, you've always had this nagging sense that something was fundamentally wrong with how we organize society. While others found comfort in traditional religious structures, you felt called to seek direct spiritual experience. While others thrived in hierarchical systems, you've been drawn toward equality and authentic connection. This isn't coincidence. This is what happens when an Aquarian soul incarnates into a Piscean world. The mystics and indigenous wisdom keepers have long understood what modern psychology is just beginning to recognize, that certain souls choose to incarnate during times of great transition. They call it a sacred contract. Before you were born, at the soul level, you agreed to experience both the completion of one age and the birth of another. You volunteered to be a bridge between worlds. But nobody told you how lonely that bridge would be. You see, bridge souls, like you, often spend the first part of their lives feeling completely isolated. You learned early that your natural way of seeing the world, your instinctive knowing that all beings are equal, that truth doesn't require institutional permission, that divinity lives within rather than above. These insights made you an outsider in Piscean systems built on hierarchy and external authority. So you did what any intelligent being would do. You learned to adapt. You developed what I call spiritual bilingualism. You learned to speak the language of the old paradigm while secretly nurturing the frequency of the new one. You became skilled at appearing to fit in while never actually belonging. The confusion and loneliness you felt wasn't a sign of failure. It was preparation. You were learning to trust your inner guidance when the external world provided no support for your natural way of being. You were developing the spiritual muscles you'd need to stand sovereign in a world designed to keep people dependent. Many of you became artists, creating beauty that carried frequencies from the future. Others became healers, working to restore wholeness in a fragmented world. Some became teachers, sharing knowledge in ways that empowered rather than controlled. But here's the fascinating part. Even those of you who took seemingly ordinary jobs were doing the work. Your mere presence in Piscean systems created a destabilizing effect. Your authenticity challenged others to question their own masks. Your refusal to participate in power games created cracks in the old structures. This is the mission you came here for. Not to fight the old world, but to embody the new one. Not to convince anyone of anything, but to demonstrate what becomes possible when a human being lives from sovereignty rather than submission, from authenticity rather than conformity. And here's where it gets really interesting. Your work isn't just about what you do, it's about what you are. Every time you choose truth over comfort, authenticity over approval, love over fear, you're affecting what scientists call the morphic field. Your frequency ripples out through the collective consciousness, giving others permission to remember their own divine nature. You're here to reclaim the suppressed wisdom that the Piscean age drove underground. You're here to heal ancestral patterns that have kept humanity small and afraid. Most importantly, you're here to model integrated spirituality, the kind that doesn't require priests, or institutions, or anyone's permission to access the divine. You came here to remember that God isn't distant but present, that truth doesn't need validation from authority figures, and that your sovereignty is actually your greatest gift to the world. When you stand in your authentic power, you give everyone around you permission to do the same. Right now, something unprecedented is happening. Bridge souls like you are recognizing each other. You're finding your tribes, not based on geography or doctrine, but on resonance. You're forming conscious communities where authenticity is valued over conformity, where questions are welcomed rather than feared, where everyone's direct connection to the divine is honored. This recognition creates what I call a cascade effect. As more bridge souls step fully into their authentic power, it becomes exponentially easier for others to awaken. The old systems that seem so solid are revealing themselves to be houses of cards, held in place only by collective agreement to pretend they were real. Indigenous prophecies from around the world speak of this time. The return of the light bearers, the rainbow warriors, the ones who would bridge heaven and earth. The Hopi speak of the great purification that would precede the new world. The Mayans pointed to this era as the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. Hindu tradition describes the transition from Kali Yuga to Satya Yuga, from the age of darkness to the age of truth. You are living prophecy, made flesh. But here's the ultimate revelation that changes everything. You didn't come here to escape this world. You came here to redream it. Your remembering of who you really are, sovereign, divine, free, is the key that unlocks the new age for all of humanity. The loneliness is ending. The confusion is clearing. The mission is becoming visible. You are not here by accident, and your time of hiding is over. The world needs you to be exactly who you came here to be. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting, "I understood it."